Welcome to the Career Intelligence Podcast, where we explore how work is changing and how people can navigate their careers with more clarity and confidence. I'm your host, Meredith Dinitz, career coach and founder of Your Career Happiness Professional Coaching. My guest today is Justin Hale, keynote speaker, trainer, and course designer at Crucial Learning, and co-author of Crucial Accountability, Proven Skills to Build Trust, Address Disappointment, and Get Results. Justin has spent nearly 2 decades at Crucial Learning, where he designs and teaches courses focused on communication, accountability, and performance. His work has been featured in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Bloomberg, CNBC, and more. And he has helped design learning experiences used by organizations around the world. What makes Justin's perspective especially valuable for this audience is that he doesn't just talk about communication in theory. He gets into the specific moments that can make or break a career, the promotion conversation you've been putting off, the feedback you're hesitant to ask for, and the honest dialogue with your manager that can shape what comes next. In this episode, we'll talk about why these moments are so easy to put off, how to advocate for yourself in a way that actually lands, and how to think through your next move when you're genuinely unsure whether to stay and try to improve things or move on. Now let's get started. Hi, Justin. Thank you so much for being here. I am really glad that we could make this happen.
Grateful to be here. Excited about this topic.
Well, before we jump in, I'd love for you to just take a minute to introduce yourself, where you are now, what you do, and maybe what led you to this work.
Absolutely. So I work for Crucial Learning. For the past 35 years or so, we've been going into organizations and helping them develop the skill sets they need to be most successful. So most people know us from our Crucial Conversations content. Maybe people have read the book or been through the course. But we have 5 or 6 different courses based on New York Times bestselling books that we go around the world and teach. And my role, I came to the organization about 20 years ago and have spent the last couple of decades as a trainer, a speaker, doing some consulting. And now I do a lot of the design of our training courses. So I really came from a psychology background in many ways. And I was a social psychology nerd in college. And when I found that there was this really beautiful combination between science and business, that's where I knew I wanted to spend my career. So I've really loved it.
Well, that's so great. One of the reasons I was excited to have you on is because a lot of what you talk about shows up pretty frequently in conversations I have with my clients. I work with mid-career professionals who are doing well on paper, but feel stuck or overlooked. And what we find a lot of the time is that it's not a skills issue. It usually comes down to them not knowing how to navigate the right conversations or how to clearly communicate their value. And so that's where I really wanted to start today. What is one conversation people tend to avoid that keeps them stuck in their careers?
Well, I'm going to cheat here and I'm going to say one conversation with yourself and one conversation with your manager. For many people, there is a gap between the way we see ourselves and the way our manager sees us. And you've got to figure out a way to close that gap. The second conversation, though, is really with your manager. And I think that what I find is that these conversations about where do I stand? What are my opportunities? Do you see me with an opportunity to be promoted or to get a salary bump? Those kinds of conversations need to happen, in my view, regularly, not as a once a year surprise where you just drop a conversation on your manager. You need to be talking with them on a regular basis about what is it they're looking for and how can you put yourself in a position to deserve that more. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is that they get really frustrated when they don't get a promotion, don't get an opportunity, but they were never explicit about their expectations. You cannot get frustrated about someone failing to live up to your expectations when you weren't clear about what you wanted those expectations to be. So regularly helping your boss understand, here's where I would like to go. Here's where I would like to grow. Here's the opportunities I would love to be considered for. It should not be a surprise if I went to your boss and said, hey, do you know where Meredith would like to go next in the next 5 years? If your boss doesn't know, that's a miss. That's a conversation you need to be having with them so that when you do say, hey, a year ago, you and I talked, I shared with you where I wanted to grow. Over the last year, I've taken on some larger responsibilities, which we have succeeded in these ways. I'd like to talk about a shift in my role to increase my responsibilities and my compensation.
Why do you think people avoid it so much?
It's uncomfortable. Let's just be honest. It's
Right.
generally not an easy conversation to have. But what I will say is that I think the less often you have it, the more uncomfortable it becomes. And the less you bring it up to your boss about your expectations, the more awkward it becomes. Because what ends up happening is you do it so rarely and it becomes this big kind of formal thing. And in one conversation, you're trying to do multiple things. You're trying to share your expectations. You're trying to advocate for why you believe you're meeting them. You're then trying to ask for more money or new responsibility. You're putting your boss on the spot. It might not be that time of year where it's time for pay bumps or increases in roles or changes in roles. And so you're really just surprising your boss with all of this. And I think that most people struggle to know how to hold it in a way that it will increase the likelihood it will go well. They've maybe had a poor experience in the past where a boss said, sorry, you get paid what you get paid. And now they're shy to bring it up. It hasn't gone very well. And so I think it's about consistency of holding that conversation in small chunks throughout the year. And it's about practicing. It's those conversations that you and I know are important. We know that so much of our happiness and satisfaction and relationship success and organizational success hinges on how those conversations go. And yet, we don't practice them. We avoid them. We tend to hold back. We only hold them when we absolutely have to, and they don't tend to go very well. It's that fear of reprisal. I think the most universal fear is of defensiveness in the other person that we talk to. Even though in a promotion conversation, we know that our boss holds the power, just because you have power doesn't mean you're immune to getting defensive.
Yeah.
Leaders get defensive when they feel pushed or threatened or questioned. And so employees are very unsure about, how do I make it safe for my boss? I thought that was their job to make it safe for me. They don't know how to create the environment where that conversation can be candid and respectful. And so I think it's a lot of that lack of skill that brings about some of that fear. But I've seen such a change in people that wouldn't naturally say, I'm an extrovert, I'm really good at conversations, be able to step up to these conversations and handle them really well because they had the skills to do it.
It makes a lot of sense. I was actually having a conversation with a client earlier today about a similar situation and helping them reframe how they approach it. I would say a lot of my clients will tell me they're doing the work, they're showing up, but somehow it's not landing the way they hoped.
Mhm.
So if someone is feeling
Yep.
overlooked or underutilized in their role, how should they approach that conversation?
If someone says, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but it's being overlooked, and that may be absolutely the case. What I've found in my experience is most of the time when there's that gap, it means that you need to do a little more homework in terms of what exactly it is that your boss wants. We did a survey with about 1,000 working professionals. And one of the most interesting statistics in the study, about 60% of the people in the study said, I'm not 100% sure what my boss wants me to do to meet expectations. I mean, that is glaringly a problem, right?
Yes.
So what ends up happening is managers often feel like they're being clear with their people about what they want, but they're using vague things like, hey, I want you to show more initiative this year. I want you to be more collaborative in 2026. And so the leader has in their mind what that looks like. But the way they share that expectation with their employee is in these sort of vague leadership talk type of one-liners. Then the employee hears that, and then they paint their own picture in their mind of what teamwork looks like, or collaboration looks like, or showing more initiative. And right off the bat, there is a gap between the expectations of the leader and the expectations of the employee. Then we get people saying, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and yet it's not landing. So I think we need to ask the question to our leaders. First, here is what I would love to achieve. Here are some expectations I have for myself of where I'd like to go. Can you spell out for me exactly what it is you'd like to see me do over the next couple of quarters, the next year, so that you would say that I deserve that opportunity? And I think you have to push your manager to be honest with you about that. What would that look like? What would you see me do more? What would you see me do less? And if the employee asks that question, the leader starts to give them some vague things like, I'd like to see you collaborate with marketing more effectively. I'd say, okay, that sounds good. What would that look like for you? What would you like to see me do specifically, whether it's in meetings or during projects or in the work specifically, that for you would equate to better collaboration with the marketing department? So really get clear from your leader about what would it look like? What are the behaviors and the actions? I think the other part is that I feel like a lot of people are engaging in activities to try to earn a promotion or earn a new opportunity that are based on things that are good, but not strategically essential for the organization. So I would ask employees, do you know what your company or organization's top 5 initiatives are this year? Could you tell them to me right off the top of your head? And if not, that's a problem. You need to know what's important to your organization. And once you understand that, my next question for you would be, what are you doing this year in your role that you can draw a direct line between you doing that thing or fulfilling that role and one of those 5 key initiatives that the executives in your organization care most about? If you can't draw that line, then you are in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So it is about being strategic. It's not about being just busy and asking for a promotion because you were extra busy this year. It's what your manager expects. It's what the company strategically is going after. And am I having an impact on those things? Those are 2 things that are absolutely essential. And then I think when you're preparing for those conversations, it's having them in an exploratory way, not demanding, right? Try to understand what it is your manager's looking for, get the clarity. And then when you go to ask for the promotion or you go to advocate, balance advocacy and inquiry. Hey, I'd like to advocate for myself. I feel like I overachieved, or I feel like I met the goals we talked about. And I'd also like to understand where I can continue to get better. But I find that a lot of people would rather tell their boss about all of the mini tasks that kept them busy this year, rather than saying, what are the big projects and outcomes that I've accomplished that you care most about or the leadership cares most about? Let me tell you about that. Tell that story. Don't just say I was really busy, because everyone's busy. And that doesn't actually tell the story you need to tell.
I think that's such an important point. And I think people lose sight of that, especially given where the market is right now and just how tight finances are, being able to connect those strategic dots. How do you create space for your manager to be honest with you without putting them on the defensive?
I think that is not an easy thing. And I empathize with the feeling of fear of, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to cause problems. I might clarify and say, I don't want you to think that I'm coming here today trying to demand or beg that you give me a pay raise or I'm out of here. My intent is to understand exactly what I need to do to deserve that promotion. And I want you to feel like if I'm not doing those things, that you can be honest with me. If you feel like I'm not there right now, why am I not there? Now, here comes the most important part. Because you can share your good intent all day long. But to your question, how do you create an atmosphere where your manager can be honest with you? The moment that matters most is when they share any feedback with you. How do you respond? So that you can hold on to that good intent. Can you still remember, why did I come to this conversation? Because I do want to grow. I want to get better. Rather than allowing yourself to slide into an intent of self-protection and they're dead wrong about me and look at all the hard work I've done. It shows on our face that we are not open to feedback. So it is one thing to share your good intent that you want feedback. It is another to respond in a way that says, keep giving it to me. I want more. So if your leader says, I just don't see you there right now, thank them. Thank you for telling me that. Because if you don't tell me, I won't know how to change. I won't get better. What do you need to see me do better, different, more of, less of in a year for you to say, I think you're there? So it's that reaction, it's the response to feedback that is huge. And I think that there's a internal part here that we all need to tackle, which is we have a tendency to feel like if someone has critical feedback about us, constructive feedback, or where we have a gap, we're missing things, we tend to want to internalize that and say that's speaking to my value, it's speaking to who I am. Just because someone has a tough message for you doesn't mean they get to author what your value is, right? You get to author that your value is important and that you're a person who's trying to do their best and you're a person that brings great things to the organization. And at the same time, you can be lacking in some abilities. You can be lacking in some performance outcomes. So I think that is essential. And I also think that it's important as you begin to ask the question about what can I do, don't just isolate performance skills around the technical stuff. Maybe what you aren't as self-aware about is the fact that you're kind of a tough person to work with. You're a little bit cantankerous when it comes to disagreements in meetings. And your colleagues think that you're really smart and technical, but you're kind of tough. Honestly, and I see that a lot. And people are often not aware that matters just as much as your technical abilities. If you work with other human beings and you have to collaborate, disagree, talk, negotiate, you got to be someone who's actually easy to talk with. You got to be someone who can have the tough conversations. And it doesn't mean you can't be confident. You can be confident, you can speak boldly, but it means if you have a pattern of getting defensive or shutting other people down in meetings or talking over people, or if you have a pattern of getting a little edgy when someone disagrees with you, over time, that pattern is going to wear on people. And that may be one of the largest career limiting habits that you don't know you have. So when you talk to your manager about what can I do better, don't just ask about technical abilities. Say, hey, how am I doing interpersonally? When it comes to working with other people, what are some things I need to start doing, stop doing, or do differently?
Soft skills, so important. And people don't always pay attention. Part of what you had just said about maybe they're not up to par, it makes me think about some of my clients, something that they might wrestle with is, I've given it everything I can. Do I stay and try to make things better, or is it time to move on? If someone is feeling stuck and genuinely unsure whether they should stay and try to improve or move on, what role should conversation play in that decision?
I think that the reality is that's going to happen to a certain percentage of us. I think that part of that initial conversation, if you're willing to have it, you should. If you talk about expectations, you can also say, look, I want to be realistic about this. I realize that the opportunities that I may grow into may not exist here in the organization. And if it's true that you want to stay there, then say that. I hope they're here. I'd like to grow into opportunities here in this company or this organization. But if they're not, will you be honest with me and will you be willing to partner with me to help me see where those other growth opportunities may be? I think it is right to have that conversation about should I stay or should I go? And it starts at the beginning, that expectation conversation. And then when you get to that point at which you're looking for a bump, you're looking for a move, and you have the conversation with the manager saying, hey, I think I'm in a place in my career and the way I contribute and the impact that I make, I'd like to see myself step up here. And if you see some hesitancy from your manager, diagnose. Hey, you seem a little hesitant. Help me understand. Is it you feel like I haven't earned it? Or maybe you are concerned about losing me? And I think for some people, moving on is the right move. I remember having a conversation with a woman who was a great contributor and she was trying really hard and she was so frustrated about the culture within her team. She was lamenting the fact that people on her team were always complaining and so negative. And she said to me, I just can't stand it anymore. And I said, well, have you tried to hold the crucial conversation with them? I have, nothing's changing. And I finally stopped her and said, have you ever considered that maybe you need to change environments? She looked at me and said, wow, I actually hadn't thought about that. Yeah, sometimes it is healthy to move on to a new opportunity. And look, there's some people that are listening to this are probably thinking, I've tried to partner with my manager and my manager isn't being honest with me. That may be a sign that you don't want to be there. That may be a sign. Because all of us are trying to work in an atmosphere where we can thrive. And you can only thrive in an atmosphere of total honesty. And if you've worked for a boss for a few years and you've continued to see them not being honest with you, it may be absolutely called for you to move on to a different environment.
What would you say to someone, though, who's afraid that having that conversation will make them look like they have one foot out the door?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that it's not wrong for you to do your homework first and say, let me get a sense of what's out there and let me have some conversations, people that I know of in other organizations. I think that can be healthy. Actually, I talked to someone who said every couple of years, she looks out and gets a sense of where the market's at and opportunities. And she said, I'm actually pretty happy where I'm at, but it's always helpful for me to get a sense of what's out there relative to what I'm doing. And I think that I understand the fear. And I think, though, that what you have to start buying into is this idea of if I can't have that conversation with my boss, what conversations can I have? And is that the kind of relationship I want with my boss? And I also think that bosses appreciate that. When you go to have that conversation, don't come with a gut feeling of what's out there. Do you think that or do you know that?
Right. Really appreciate how you said, if you don't feel like you can have that honest conversation, then what can you talk with them about? And I think that's an important takeaway that people really need to lean into.
Yeah. And like I said at the beginning, if you've been having these conversations all along, it won't feel weird. I remember having a relationship with the boss where she knew every quarter we were so candid with each other about where I was at and what I was enjoying and where I wanted to grow that if I would have said to her, hey, I've been having some of these conversations with other people, there's some interesting roles, she would have not been surprised because she knew, because I was honest with her about where I was at. And so it's important to have that kind of candid conversation. And if you're fearful, then I worry in general about the relationship. And I think that it's important for you also. I think a lot of us are always thinking promotion, promotion, promotion. which I know we all want. But I also would consider all of these conversations, use it as a process to build your reputation, not just get promoted. Even if you
Yes.
don't get promoted immediately to a new role, when you demonstrate reliability, initiative, ownership over your career, you're sending a really powerful message to your boss and to the rest of the organization.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something that I know is on a lot of people's minds right now, and it comes up in many of my conversations, AI, and specifically the fear around it. And I'm curious how AI is showing up in these conversations you're having, especially for someone who maybe is unsure how it impacts their role or is generally feeling concerned about what it means for their future.
I feel that concern, and I've seen a lot of the data. I was talking to a friend recently who's an executive at a Fortune 50 company. He said, look, we've rolled out AI. And I said, how is it going? He said, not well. I said, what do you mean? He said, some people are using it, some aren't. They have concerns about how to use it or those kinds of things. And none of them are surfacing the concerns. Many of them are afraid it's going to replace them. So they don't want to even have the conversation. And it's just creating this total undercurrent in our culture that's becoming an absolute disaster. And so we need to be honest about our concerns about it. We need to be open about it. And what I would suggest to people is you can either look at it as a threat or you can say, this is an opportunity for me. Where do I see the opportunity for me in my career? It's an opportunity for people when they get in that mindset to upscale yourself and your skill offerings to your organization and to your career. I remember reading just recently, one organization was saying, we're only going to promote people who have a certain proficiency with AI because we're going to send that message to the organization to say, this is how we work now. And so we only want to promote people that are aligned with this. They're doing their homework. They're learning the technology. They're reading about it. They're trying things out. They're trying to integrate it into their work. And they come back and say, here's how it's improving my work. So don't back up in fear. Instead, step forward and say, how could I leverage this to make myself even more essential to my organization? How could I leverage this to be more essential in the marketplace, actually make myself more valuable to potential people that might want to hire me within my organization or outside of my organization? And so I think this common pattern of fear about being replaced, which I understand, and there's also these ethical concerns and lack of understanding. What are the parameters? And so we kind of shut down. And I would encourage people to step with both feet in and say, okay, what are the questions I should be asking here? What can I learn to make myself essential? And so if you're someone in your role who shows up and says to your boss, hey, I've been reading over the last couple of weeks about how we can use this specific AI software to help us do X, Y, and Z, you're going to come off as very essential. You're going to come off as an expert. You're going to come off as a subject matter expert around AI relative to your job or to your team or to your market. And your organization is going to value that, right? And so I think it is about doubling down on it rather than stepping back in fear. And like anything in our world, adaptability might be the most important skill anyone can have in their career. The ability to look at the world and say, what are the skills essential for someone like me to be successful in this environment? And are they different skills than I needed to be successful yesterday? If so, I have to adapt.
That's great advice. Before I let you go, what is the one thing you want someone to walk away and actually do after listening today?
The one thing is that you have much more capacity than you think. A lot of us like to limit ourselves based on our history. Well, in my career, I've done X, Y, and Z. And so we limit ourselves based on that. I only have skills to do X, Y, and Z. But your ability to be malleable, to change, to adapt, to acquire new habits that make you a completely new person in your career is vast and I would say almost endless. I have been able to work with and coach so many people who shifted, whether it be poor habits around communication, poor habits around productivity. Maybe they weren't great at being organized, or poor habits around management abilities or leadership or those kinds of things. And when you can shift your habits, when you know how to acquire new habits around productivity or communication, you can become a completely improved and vastly better version of yourself. So don't limit yourself. Don't say, I'm this. Instead, ask yourself, what are the skills and habits that have gotten me to where I am today? And what are the skills and habits that I need to acquire and start doing that are going to get me to this other place tomorrow? Your habits don't have to define you if they're hurting you right now. You can change habits, right? You can rewire the way your brain thinks and the things you do automatically to be a much more successful, much better version of yourself so that you can be successful in your career. And so I think that's such a huge thing, is being able to be realistic with yourself and also be hopeful about who do I want to be and what are the behaviors and habits I need to acquire to be more of that person. I think is the hopeful message I would leave with people as they consider their own careers. Take the wheel, take the ownership. You are not just the outcome of these habits you've had your whole life. You can change those. You can become a better version of yourself.
Such great advice. And I think that's something our listeners can really hold on to. Justin, thank you so much for being here. This was such a great conversation. If people want to learn more about your work or connect, what's the best way for them to find you?
Cruciallearning.com. That's where you can find us. I also always enjoy when people reach out on LinkedIn and say hello. If you listen to the episode and want to reach out and connect, I always love to hear how these ideas are helping folks.
Excellent. And I'll also put those in the show notes for people.
Thanks, Meredith.
I'm so grateful to Justin for joining me today. I really appreciated how practical he made these conversations feel, especially the reminder that so many people aren't stuck because of their skills, but because they're not having the right conversations or not sure how to approach them. A few things that really stood out to me: the importance of being clear about what you want and not assuming your manager already knows. That question he posed, if you don't feel like you can have an honest conversation with your manager, what does that say about the relationship? And his point about AI, that the professionals who will thrive are not necessarily the most technical ones. They're the ones who step forward with curiosity instead of stepping back in fear. If you would like to connect with Justin or learn more about Crucial Learning, I will include those links in the show notes. And if today's conversation resonated with you, this is exactly the kind of work I do with my clients. I work primarily with mid-career professionals who feel successful on paper but are starting to question what is next, whether that is navigating a job search, going after a promotion, or simply getting clear on what they really want. You can learn more about working with me at yourcareerhappinesspc.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the Career Intelligence Podcast and share it with someone who's been putting off a conversation they know they need to have. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back again with another episode next week. In the meantime, stay curious, keep learning, and keep building your career intelligence.
Forward.